Hello, everybody, and welcome to class. Let me get this all situated, and then we will get to work. All right, good deal. Okay, everybody, welcome to class. We will go ahead and get started today with our lesson. Take your books and turn to page number 417 in your books. Page number 417. So, recapping what we've been talking about. We have been talking about Napoleonic France. We talked about Emperor Napoleon. Emperor Napoleon, I described him as an arrogant person. He was an arrogant person. And his attempts to try to conquer all of Europe, all of basically the world. Now, he still had the Atlantic Ocean he had to deal with, but basically all of Europe at the time realistically could have been in Napoleon's grasp. Napoleon came on the heels of a bloody revolution. The French Revolution is where Napoleon came and shined. Napoleon would not have been as successful an emperor if he did not have the French Revolution to prop him up. Now, Napoleon basically has most of all of Europe under his control in one form or the other, and then he loses. He loses to a coalition of nations. These coalition of nations include England, and he is now exiled to Elba. He is exiled to Elba, where he is allowed to retain the title of emperor of the island of Elba. But that's about it. He remains there until he doesn't see any virtue in staying on Elba. He hops ship and sails back for France. Once he lands on the coast of France, he moves towards Paris. The world is getting scared that he is going to try to reinvigorate his old empire. And he makes it into Paris, the capital, and the entire city of Paris wants him as their emperor again. They make him their emperor, and he raises up an army, and he wants to retain his old empire, and he loses at the Battle of Waterloo, probably one of the most famous battles in history. After this, Napoleon is exiled to an island, and when he's exiled the final time, he is not giving a title, he's not given anything. They said, you just need to stay on this island until you die. Now, he only lived for 6 more years, so it isn't as though he was going to live long enough anyway. But in the ensuing, after his loss, Europe got around to trying to figure out how they were going to cope with a Europe whose face had changed. Because remember, Napoleon had changed the map. Napoleon abolished the Holy Roman Empire and created a new empire in its place called the Confederacy of the Rhine. Europe looked a whole lot different than it did before Napoleon took power. The nations of Europe are going to have to do something to try to restore things to the way they had been before. So what we have here is their attempt to fix everything, to fix what Napoleon had broken. Now, what we have is a search for stability, because Napoleon had thrown the world into panic, and the people of Europe just wanted everything to return to normal. So what they did was, the leaders of Europe met at what is known by history as the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna was an attempt to restore the old order. For instance, the Holy Roman Empire had been overthrown, and the Confederacy of the Rhine had been started. Emperors and kings had been overthrown by Napoleon. The Congress of Vienna was supposed to take those rulers that had been taken off the throne by Napoleon and try to prop them back up in control of their territories. So the Congress of Vienna, its official definition you'll need to know, is the international conference after the final defeat of Napoleon that reinstituted much of the political orders in Europe before the reign of Napoleon. Now that's a long definition, but it is the definition you need to understand. And as long as you get the gist of the definition, you'll be fine. Now, what are some of the major figures of this Congress? Well, one was Prince Clemens von Metternich. He was the Austrian foreign minister, and he will become important not necessarily in today's lecture, but in tomorrow's lecture, in Friday's lecture. But you do need to keep this guy in your mind. Metternich, basically German. He's going to become very important. Now, next, the second most important guy is Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. Now, Talleyrand is actually a very important individual. See, when this is going on, the Congress of Vienna is taking place in 1814, in 1814. Where is America at this point? America has just gotten off of the War of 1812, and a lot of the people that were around during the Founding Fathers are still around. And Talleyrand is one of these people. Talleyrand is an individual, he's a French representative, and he was the bane of John Adams' existence. You'll remember John Adams was appointed by the U.S. Congress. First off, after the Declaration of Independence was signed, they shipped him off to France. And he was going to be America's ambassador to France. And he remained ambassador to France while Benjamin Franklin was the chief ambassador. John Adams was the second ambassador. John Adams and Benjamin Franklin didn't necessarily get along. They had their moments, but other times they just didn't see eye to eye. And Congress replaced John Adams, moved John Adams to the Netherlands, to Holland, and then eventually to England as America's minister there. But while he was in France, he met a lot of French individuals. Some of these people would end up causing trouble for him when John Adams became president. One of these guys was Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. He caused a lot of problems for John Adams, especially when he was president. See, what happened was there was something called the XYZ affair in American history. In the XYZ affair, basically it was this huge blunder by the French government. It's a PR disaster. America was trying to negotiate with them, and basically it was found out that certain French individuals were bribing, or blackmailing is a better way to phrase it, blackmailing American officials. Basically, okay, Americans, you want a seat at the table with France, you got to give us some cash. You got to grease the palms. You got to come with a little something, something. You got to make a little money, honey. If you don't understand what I'm saying yet, there's no hope for you. Talleyrand was part of this. And he was the bane of John Adams' existence. They could not stand each other. But it's important to realize all of these things are meshing together like cogs in a machine. John Adams isn't in any way related to the Congress of Vienna. But we know of Talleyrand because he also had a huge dust-up with John Adams. And it's interesting how they're all falling together. But anyway, with all of this being said, one of the first things they need to do is they need to redraw the maps of Europe. So Napoleon comes to power, and he draws up Europe, he redraws the borders, he creates new countries, dissolves old countries. And one of the things they need to do is redraw the maps of Europe. So many Europeans hoped that the Vienna peace settlement would support some of the rights and freedoms championed by the French Revolution. So what the people of Europe wanted was this Vienna Peace Conference, this Vienna Conference, to reinvigorate the ideas of Rousseau, Montesquieu, John Locke. These Enlightenment thinkers that had succeeded so well in the American Revolution had failed in the French Revolution only because they didn't keep those principles. They very quickly ran away from those principles. But Europeans wanted this settlement to address these Enlightenment ideas of freedom. In all reality, that's not what happened. In all reality, what happened was they just went back to the way things were. There was no huge push for democracy. There was no huge push for republicanism. It was all, let's put the kings back in power. That's all it was. The leading diplomats at Vienna were more concerned about restoring order to Europe. They sought to reestablish political stability, maintain the balance of power among the leading European nations, and respond to the revolutionary ideas spread by France. Now, the best way they can redraw the map of Europe is to put France in its place. This is the second time in recent history that France has gotten up off the mat and have come back with a vengeance. They want France to stay down. Don't get back up off the mat. We want you to stay where you're at. Well, their way of doing this, they instituted what's called indemnities. Now, indemnities, this is stripping France of all conquests and restoring the French borders from 1792. If you don't remember what 1792, what that date was, it's very important because that was in the midst of the French Revolution. French Revolution was just at its starting point in 1792. So all of that land that Napoleon had gained, it's gone. France kept nothing but was already given to them before. So not only that, they also had to pay war damages. They had to pay compensation to other nations. That's going to lead to some problems. But that was part of the agreement on how they could safeguard the world from France getting back off the map. Now, next, they wanted to restore legitimate rulers. During his conquest, Napoleon had deposed many European rulers, placing his relatives on their thrones. So basically, Napoleon's playing kingmaker here. He's capturing all of these nations and then putting his own relatives in as kings. And this brought a question of legitimacy. Who is the legitimate ruler? The Congress removed these fake rulers, and where they were possible, they restored the old monarchs. That is what was going on. Now, meanwhile, the final settlement at Vienna. The Congress was close to reaching a final peace settlement in March of 1815. When news reached Vienna that Napoleon had left the island of Elba and was on his way to Paris, the leaders of the Grand Alliance decided to bring together their armies and once more rid Europe of Napoleon. So all of this has taken place in the time that Napoleon had been exiled to Elba. Napoleon flees Elba, and then you've got the Battle of Waterloo. So Waterloo, Leipzig, the Vienna Council took place in between those two times. They were just about to come to an agreement when he raised an army again. And this was the last time he was going to end up fighting any wars. Although the Congress of Vienna had settled the matters of encirclement, legitimacy, compensation, and balance of power, its delegates made few concessions to the causes of nationalism and liberalism, being the ideas of Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, the Enlightenment ideas that contributed to the American Revolution. So in other words, things are staying the same. Meanwhile, the United States comes up into the news again. What happens is President Monroe is the President of the United States. And he made a speech to the United States Congress. And in the speech, he outlined his idea of foreign policy. The James Monroe foreign policy was basically, Europe, you stay on your side of the world, we'll stay on our side of the world, we'll not bother each other, will not colonize Europe. Europe don't colonize America. That's going to be our relationship. In a speech to the United States Congress, he warned the European nations that any attempt to establish or reestablish colonies in the Western Hemisphere would be considered an unfriendly act of aggression. Although the United States did not have the power to enforce the Monroe Doctrine, the British Navy was able to block any attempt on the part of the European alliance. So, while Europe is trying to get their house in order, America plants its flag and says, this is our policy. Europe, you just got off 2 wars with Napoleon. Tell you what, we don't want any part of that. We're not going to start sending colonists to Europe to start trying to apply to create colonies out in Europe. You guys stop colonizing in the New World. You keep your wars to yourselves. We'll keep our wars to ourselves. That'll be our relationship. So in the midst of all of this geopolitical politics that's taking place in Europe, the Americans plant their stake and say, okay, this is where we fall on all of this. So